During World War II, few soldiers struck more fear or fascination into their enemies than the Japanese. Before Pearl Harbor, many Western militaries underestimated them, seeing Japan as technologically behind and, honestly, kind of strategically reckless. After the fall of Singapore, the march through Java, and the assault on Australia's doorstep, that perception just flipped overnight. Allied soldiers came to view the Japanese as almost superhuman warriors, fearless, fanatical, and willing to die for their emperor. But the truth, as always, was far more complex. The Japanese soldier wasn't some unstoppable machine. He was a cunning strategist, adapting to impossible conditions with extraordinary creativity and, yeah, a certain ruthlessness. In the jungles of the Pacific, outnumbered and undersupplied, Japanese troops turned every inch of terrain into a weapon. They knew the environment intimately. Every vine, cave, and coconut tree could be repurposed into a deadly trap. Allied troops quickly learned that nothing could be trusted. Not food, not souvenirs, not even corpses. Reports from the field tell stories that, honestly, sound like scenes from a horror film. One U.S. officer on Saipan warned his men never to drink from bottles left behind by the enemy, and with good reason. Many soldiers ignored the warning and died from wood alcohol poisoning after drinking liquor laced with methanol. On the Admiralty Islands, a soldier tried to collect a Japanese pistol as a war trophy. He cleverly used a hook and string to pull it toward him, suspecting it might be booby-trapped. Satisfied it was safe, he took it back to camp. That night, when he pulled back the cocking piece, the pistol exploded, blowing off his hand. The Japanese excelled at turning everyday objects into explosives. A phonograph might detonate when its arm was lifted. A radio might be filled with explosives instead of batteries. Even parasols, flashlights, and pipes were wired to kill. On the island of Leyte, soldiers reported coconut bombs, hollowed coconut shells packed with black powder and grenades, disguised to look natural on the jungle floor. Others were attached to vines or tripwires, ready to explode when brushed by an unsuspecting boot. Allied troops soon learned that even dead Japanese soldiers could be traps. Some were found rigged with grenades under their armpits, ready to explode if moved. The cruelty of the Pacific War didn't end with explosives. Japanese troops often turned deception into an art form. Knowing that surrender was considered shameful in their culture, they used fake surrenders as weapons. In the Admiralty Islands, Allied soldiers described how a lone Japanese soldier would approach with hands raised, concealing a grenade. When close enough, he'd pull the pin, killing himself and anyone nearby. On other occasions, entire groups faked surrender to lure troops into ambushes. One American colonel and 20 of his men were wiped out after responding to what they thought was a mass surrender, only to discover a Japanese weapons detachment lying in wait. Such tactics bred paranoia across the Pacific. Soldiers stopped trusting the universal symbols of mercy. Even medics were targeted. Reports tell of Japanese nurses pretending to surrender, then tossing grenades among wounded soldiers. Allied units learned to strip prisoners naked before accepting surrender, checking for hidden weapons or explosives. But perhaps the most chilling tricks came from those who played dead. Japanese soldiers would lie motionless for hours among bodies, waiting for Allied troops to approach. When medics bent down to help, they'd leap up and attack with grenades or knives. It made battlefield recovery a nightmare. Every body had to be treated as potentially alive and deadly. Deception also worked at a distance. Japanese forces often used decoys to bait artillery or reveal Allied positions. On Makin Island, United States soldiers discovered dummy anti-aircraft guns carved from palm trunks, complete with hollow muzzles. Others found mannequins, made of coconuts and sticks, wearing real Japanese uniforms. These diversions successfully drew Allied fire, allowing hidden Japanese positions to remain undetected. On the ground, ropes tied to bushes were used to simulate troop movement, tricking soldiers into firing and revealing their locations. At night, Japanese snipers dropped firecrackers or snapped bamboo to imitate gunfire, a cheap but effective way to provoke return fire. Even language became a weapon. Many Japanese soldiers learned English phrases to impersonate Allied troops, calling out nicknames or commands in perfect accents. An Australian sniper once heard a voice in the darkness calling, "Hey Bill, it's Al," he answered, and was shot dead by the disguised enemy. On Banaka Island, Japanese soldiers shouted "medics" after wounding Americans, then opened fire on those who came to help. Others disguised themselves in stolen Allied uniforms or even dressed as civilians, Filipino women in one case, to get close enough to throw grenades. The psychological warfare didn't stop there. Japanese forces used loudspeakers and phonographs to play recordings of battles and screaming soldiers during nighttime attacks, aiming to terrify defenders and amplify confusion. Firecrackers were dropped behind enemy lines by aircraft to simulate approaching infantry, and when all else failed, they resorted to emotional manipulation. One report described Japanese soldiers forcing a native family, including a crying child, to walk toward Allied lines, using them as human shields while advancing behind with bayonets. Every one of these tactics, from booby-trapped flags to fake surrender, reveals how far the Japanese army was willing to go to offset their disadvantages. They fought in conditions most modern soldiers could hardly imagine, turning scarcity into strategy. It wasn't honor or mysticism that made them formidable. It was ingenuity under pressure and a terrifying readiness to sacrifice anything, even humanity itself, for the empire's cause. Today, reading these reports gives us a glimpse into the brutal reality of the Pacific War. It wasn't just a clash of armies, but a psychological duel fought in mud, smoke, and fear. The men who faced these traps never forgot them, and their accounts remind us that the line between cleverness and cruelty in wartime is razor thin.